Carolyn Guzski is a pianist and musicologist. She studied at Peabody, Juilliard, and received her PhD from CUNY. And she did her dissertation on American opera at the Metropolitan Opera. So she is the perfect person to talk to us today about about the centennial of Fanciulla del West, which premiered almost exactly 100 years ago today at the Metropolitan Opera. You can read her full bio in the program, so I won't delay any further. This wonderful scholar, let's welcome her. Carolyn.
Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to help start things off, hopefully with a bang, if PowerPoint will. Cooperate. Oh, there we go. Yay. Okay, the gods of PowerPoint are with us this morning. The world premiere of La Fanciulla del West at the Metropolitan Opera, a vivid shooting star in the operatic firmament of 1910, seems, even at this distance, an isolated glamour event in the life of a theater that had never before produced a true first night. Glamorous that event certainly was, but isolated it was not. Rather, the Met's inaugural world premiere represented the culmination of a comprehensive reassessment of the theater's repertoire, which had largely ossified by the turn of the 20th century, an intricate process nearly a decade in the making that involved major changes in the management structure of the theater itself. Thus, the backstory of Fanciulla, if I can borrow a term from hip-hop, reveals a good deal about opera in America and American opera during the so-called progressive era in the United States. This was an era, by the way, dominated by Theodore Roosevelt, whose portrait hangs outside the room, most apropos, I thought. A situation in opera that continues to color the Metropolitan's stance towards national opera today. The story begins with Otto Hermann Kahn, German Jewish financier, charismatic Gilded Age emigrant, and one of the most remarkable patrons of the arts that America has ever seen. Kahn joined the Metropolitan's board of directors. This is the production board, by the way, not the box holders board, for those of you who know about the Met two-board situation. Kahn joined the board almost by accident in 1903 when a senior partner at his investment banking firm declined an invitation to do so. Having vaulted from Mannheim to Manhattan and initiated a brilliant career on Wall Street, Kahn set out to, in the words of Scott Fitzgerald, master the East. This meant gaining a controlling voice in the affairs of its great cultural institutions, no small ambition, as they were firmly under the control of the Gilded Age inheritors who had overseen their rapid development after the Civil War. At the Met, the names of Astor and Vanderbilt reigned supreme, together with J.P. Morgan, who held title to the exalted Box 35 at the center of the theater's diamond horseshoe. This, of course, was the traditional position of the royal box in European theaters. Yet Kahn, blessed with a clear and facile mind and inexhaustible energy, managed to find a significant place among the supporters of Austrian theatrical manager Heinrich Conried, who won the coveted impresario contract to manage the Met in 1903 after defeating the German-American conductor and composer Walter Damrosch by a single vote. Conried, later termed a megalomaniac by Alma Mahler, attended first to his singer's roster by taking up a valuable bequest from his predecessor, an option on an Italian tenor then unknown in America, Enrico Caruso. Then he admirably moved forward on the repertoire front by bringing to the Met the first staged version of Parsifal outside of Bayreuth, a true coup du théâtre for which he successfully battled representatives of an infuriated Cosima Liszt Wagner in a federal courtroom at the Southern District of New York. Conried also accomplished the successful negotiation of a conducting contract with Gustav Mahler in 1907. Yet during his tenure, the Met still lacked a great conductor for the Italian repertory, Conried having failed in repeated attempts to convince Arturo Toscanini to join his roster. And the new impresario unwisely declined exclusive contracts to modern French operas then in the ascendant. The two big ones here were Péléas and Louise, when they were offered to him by the estimable French theatrical agent Gabriel Astruc. As Conried's successor, Giulio Gatti-Casazza, has later remarked, even if he had not intended to produce them, it would have paid Conried to at least buy them up and throw them into his desk drawer to keep them out of the hands of any rivals in the burgeoning American culture industry. Instead, Conried placed his repertoire bids on Europe's two leading dramatic composers, Richard Strauss and Giacomo Puccini. Arguably, this gambit made sense. Conried was able to convince Puccini to visit the Met in 1907 to personally supervise its premiere production of Madama Butterfly, and in the same year he audaciously mounted the American premiere of Salome, or rather attempted to mount, as the famous severed head scene here with Olive Fremstead so repelled onlookers at the dress rehearsal, clumsily scheduled on a Sunday at 11 a.m., the traditional church hour, that the production was withdrawn after its opening night. As the Conried regime began to unravel, internal documents at the Met show Otto Kahn increasingly poised for a classic corporate takeover. First, he gathered a core group of supporters on his board. These included William K. Vanderbilt, a grandson of the legendary Commodore Vanderbilt, Harry Payne Whitney, and telecommunications pioneer Clarence Mackay, an especially important ally since, as a Roman Catholic, he was the only other non-Protestant board member besides Kahn. With Kahn in the lead, the group engaged in attempts to placate J.P. Morgan, here in the famous Steichen photograph where his left hand seems to be grasping a knife. You probably know this photo very well. Whose daughter Louisa Morgan Satterley was reputedly the chief complainant in the Salome debacle, as well as a livid Richard Strauss, whose wrath was not to be taken lightly, as the entire musical world knew that his setting of Elektra was at hand. Startlingly, both of these initial repertoire battles were lost. Salome did not return to the Met stage until 1934, although a 1920s headless version starring Maria Yuritsa was unsuccessfully proposed. And Strauss, demonstrating a fairly typical fit of his composerly peak, threw Elektra to the rival Manhattan Opera House, aided by the fact that the Metropolitan artist he had courted for the lead, the celebrated soprano Geraldine Farrar, whom Puccini had found inadequate in Butterfly, had declined Salome as too strenuous for her lyric voice. Ousting Conried, on the other hand, proved far simpler, particularly since, in addition to alienating Strauss, the impresario had negligently allowed the Met's exclusive agreement for rights to produce Puccini's operas to lapse with the Italian publisher Ricordi. Kahn's official parting statement on behalf of the Metropolitan in 1908 is particularly telling for laying greatest weight on these repertoire deficiencies. And I quote Kahn here. Actually, they're the official board minutes, and they are understood by scholars, including myself, to be in the voice of Kahn. In reviewing the results of your management with every desire to do you full justice, we find, as against a number of accomplishments, grievous and irreparable faults, such as your failure to produce modern French operas to the great detriment of the Metropolitan Opera, as well as your gross and most damaging oversight in the matter of the contract for the Puccini operas. Kahn's efforts to turn over a new repertoire leaf at the Met were complicated by a new operatic rival that Conried had unwittingly aided. This was Oscar Hammerstein I, grandfather of the famed Broadway lyricist, who reigned over the populist Manhattan Opera 6 blocks from the Met from 1906 to 1910. Hammerstein's immediate acquisition of the work of the most prominent contemporary French composers of the day, these would be Debussy, Massenet, and Charpentier, as well as their leading interpreters, Mary Garden and the baritone Maurice Renaud, among others, proved to be an expensive thorn in the Met's side. Although Kahn had offered the directorship of his institution to Gustav Mahler, the great conductor did not accept, citing a greater desire to compose. This gave Kahn all the impetus he needed to audaciously poach the general manager and chief conductor of La Scala, namely Giulio Gatti-Casazza and Arturo Toscanini. As both were personal friends of Puccini as well as the Ricordi family, contractual obligations vis-à-vis Puccini's prior work could soon be put in order, and after the trio's discussion of the developing Fanciulla project during an evening in Milan in October of 1907, the idea of a Met premiere began to take shape. Hammerstein retaliated by initiating battle on the American front and granted Victor Herbert, the celebrated musical comedy composer, and not incidentally a naturalized American citizen, the first operatic commission by an American institution to write for his stage in English. The New York Times added fuel to the fire by identifying David Belasco as the potential librettist under the provocative headline, "Girl of the Golden West may be taken as foundation if Puccini doesn't want it." Gatti-Casazza's 1908 arrival was portrayed as a dignified event by the Metropolitan, but the impending national opera war between the new manager and Hammerstein predictably delighted the New York press corps. By most accounts, audiences were also enchanted that their city had leapt to the forefront of the global opera scene, as they were sure to be chief beneficiaries of the newly expanded rosters of artists and repertoire. For his part, Kahn, in his official press statement, expressly fortified the belief that the new Met manager had been given a specific mandate with respect to expectations in the realm of contemporary repertoire. Gatti-Casazza's management has been distinguished by the catholicity of its repertoire, cultivating equally the classical operas and the works of modern French, Italian, and German composers. Yet none of these plans quite countered the American threat posed by Hammerstein. Victor Herbert had himself pointedly remarked that the enterprise which Hammerstein has stimulated in the American operatic field is in striking contrast to the conditions of apathy and stagnation that have hitherto prevailed, a rather caustic pronouncement from the usually genial composer. Having been elected chairman of the board in 1907, Kahn moved quickly, even in advance of the Gatti-Toscanini arrival, by convening a summit early in 1908 at which Mahler emerged as the key artistic figure. Significantly linking his artistic task to the goal of establishing the Metropolitan as a national cultural institution, Kahn declared, "It has been the idea of a number of directors for a long time now that the Metropolitan Opera House would be more truly a national institution if English opera were given there." This nationalist tack also had the advantage of potentially vanquishing Hammerstein's populist regime as a sort of artistic imposter. Strenuously wishing to avoid opera in translation, which he considered below the artistic standards of the Met, Kahn planned Mahler's version of Weber's Oberon, composed in 1826 to an English libretto, albeit based on a translation from the German, as the inaugural production of the new initiative. At the same meeting, Mahler was assigned the responsibility of examining a group of dramatic scores accumulated from American composers, and this he did the following summer on his annual sojourn to the Austrian Tyrol. It was there, while a guest with his family at the Trenkerhof farmhouse in Toblach on the Italian border. I believe the town is now in Italy, called Dobbiaco. In the solitary composing hut, which still stands on this property, that he selected The Pipe of Desire by respected second New England School composer Frederick Shepard Converse, a Harvard alumnus, by the way, studied with John Knowles Paine, as the Metropolitan's premier production by an American composer. Although the details of the selection were reported in the Boston Evening Transcript by the critic H.T. Parker, the Met itself never publicized it and retained this veil of anonymity in future score adjudications as well. During that same summer of 1908, Gatti-Casazza labored on the European front. Not only did his plans for the Fanciulla creative team begin to coalesce. You all know that very famous photograph. But the new manager designate placed himself definitively ahead of the French curve by meeting personally with Claude Debussy and Gustave Charpentier in Paris and convincing both to grant the exclusive American rights for any works they had in progress to the Metropolitan. As Debussy's official paybook page, which as you can see is largely blank, shows, the composer's pronouncement that it is a bad business you are doing. I do not believe that I will ever finish any part of all this, proved prescient. The two projected operas listed above the red line, by the way, are, for which he had received a small advance from the Met, were La Chute de la Maison Usher and Le Diable dans le Beffroi, both after Poe. Charpentier hoped to repeat his phenomenal success with Louise by composing a sequel, Julienne ou la vie du poète. Sounds nice title, not as successful as the nice title, but the Metropolitan certainly afforded him luxury casting with Caruso and Geraldine Farrar, but success was brief despite their efforts. Another European entry in the world premiere stakes was Humperdinck's Königskinder, which superseded plans for Oberon when the composer, an ardent admirer of Mahler, was persuaded to recast an earlier melodrama as a successor to his Hansel and Gretel, in English. The ambitious plan did not materialize, but the Met retained the distinguished premiere rights in German, producing a memorable first night 18 days after the Fanciulla premiere. Here we can see Geraldine Farrar as the goose girl along with her geese, and those are real geese at her insistence. Both European world premieres, however, were diplomatically preceded by the house's true first American opera. This was Converse's Pipe of Desire in March of 1910. The Metropolitan's bold new repertoire program was not without controversy. One attack emanated from Cleofonte Campanini, music director of the Chicago Opera, who appears to have found a willing accomplice in Victor Herbert. Herbert's first opera, Natoma, after an Indianist scenario that is set like Fanciulla in 19th century California, had been summarily rejected by Gotti after Hammerstein, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy in 1910, failed to produce it. Campanini, a man of palpable ambition, he, like Toscanini, was from Parma, and the Italians sometimes refer to him as l'altro direttore, the other conductor from Parma. Campanini directed much of his energy against the Metropolitan, and his press agent was probably paid overtime for placing this headline in the periodical Sunset, the magazine of the Pacific and of all the Far West, in early 1911. Identifying Natoma as the real American opera was an obvious swipe at Fanciulla, an attempt to style Puccini as the Italian imposter among the true Americans of the Western frontier. Another disgruntled observer was Walter Damrosch, still smarting from his fall from grace at the theater where his father, German conductor Leopold Damrosch, had reigned during the Wagner glory days of the 1880s. In 1910, Damrosch took the opportunity during one of his many guest speaking invitations to slam the new Met for its aggressive courting of contemporary European composers to the alleged detriment of American talent. Kahn managed to placate both composers by giving their operas at the Met. Herbert's second opera, Madeleine, a charming one-act conversation opera, somewhat influenced by a Wolf Ferrari, who was quite in fashion at the time, as well as Strauss's Rosenkavalier, and Damrosch's setting of Cyrano. Both coincidentally starred, or perhaps not coincidentally, starred Gotti's wife, the New Zealand soprano Frances Alda. That is her up in the tower in the balcony scene. A century later, the cultural phenomenon of Fanciulla resonates in a rebirth at the Metropolitan of the composer-driven musical culture that it initiated. Focusing first on American composers, the Met has commissioned from John Corigliano, The Ghosts of Versailles, world premiere 1991, Philip Glass's The Voyage, 1992, John Harbison, The Great Gatsby, 1999, Tobias Picker, An American Tragedy After Dreiser, 2005, and Tan Dun, The First Emperor, 2006, with Placido Domingo singing in English. Pretty well, too. A second phase has presented new productions of American works premiered elsewhere. William Bolcom's A View from the Bridge, a co-production with the Chicago Opera, which had never happened in the days of Campanini, came to the Met in 2002. Philip Glass's Satyagraha, 2008. John Adams' Dr. Atomic, 2009, with Gerald Finley as J. Robert Oppenheimer, and John Adams' Nixon in China, which is now due in February of 2011. I'd like to believe that the creative spirits of Kahn and Gotti, as well as Puccini and Belasco, live on in their tireless quest to both conquer and celebrate the American landscape. Thank you.